Well, welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast. And I've got another amazing guest on my show today, and that is no other than Josef Schinwald. And we are going to be talking all about podcasts. But Josef is not just a podcast host himself, but he specializes in getting the most amazing guests for podcast hosts. So, Josef, welcome to the Influence Global podcast.
Thank you, Gordon, for inviting me. This is a very special interview because you have a fantastic match with me, with your audience.
Oh, thank you
and
so
I respect
much.
you very much for
that's
all your expertise in the influencer marketing space.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. Well, we're doing this podcast from your lovely home in Mallorca at the moment. So is the weather nice and warm there?
Yeah, I'm getting used to it. Every day it's beautiful sunshine.
Yeah, my heart bleeds. Okay, so for our listeners, tell us a little bit about your background before you got into the sort of podcasting world.
Yeah, my background is that I am from Austria, and I left Austria to study in New York. I studied actually divinity, Eastern philosophy, and then because I had my bachelor in political science, I took on an opportunity to work with a hemisphere newspaper, and I ended up in Central America first 3 years, and then I was promoted to Buenos Aires, where I got another master's in international business, and also I actually taught at the university, and I was the general manager of that hemisphere newspaper then, and the associate publisher, where I learned a lot about media. And I got a lot of interviews myself, like 50 interviews. I was interviewed about pragmatic case studies of businesses applied to a certain expertise, like measurement, the balanced scorecard that time, and profit models. So that was my highlight of my life. And then I did some e-commerce store when I was in Canada in the wedding industry, and then I went back shortly to Austria. And since 5 years, I do the podcast guesting agency because I knew it right away when I saw the opportunity that is for me, because I really like to be hanging out, sorry to say that like this, but with experts who like extraordinary individuals.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because from my podcast, which has gone over 110 episodes now, right at the very start, I always wanted to have guests on the show because I think they bring, if you select the right people, of course, they bring unique insight into your show that helps educate the audience, but also inspires them. And I know when excuse me, I know when I've been listening as well to other people's podcasts, particularly during the pandemic when it wasn't an easy period, you've got the attention of somebody for what can be 20 minutes, half an hour, in some cases an hour, and that's quite a lot of attention in this sort of busy world that we work in, isn't it? So in your eyes, what makes a great podcast?
A great podcast is who has very qualifying guests, who qualifies the guests really well, stays at the topic, doesn't space out. And because then you can expect the audience who subscribes to the podcast, they are also really, really interested in this topic. So when I talk with you today, and your podcast is one of those, I looked at the guests and I listened to several episodes, and I can clearly see that there's a good match between your guest, between the audience and your expertise. And that's a good podcast, because that's the problem often with podcast matching services. I love them because for new podcasters, it's great to get started. And for solopreneurs who want to get started with podcast guesting, it's also nice because there's an algorithmically, they get matched. But many times what I see, this average podcast, you have to really have an enthusiasm and a passion for this talking thing, because it doesn't give you much return on your time and your investment. So I would say, not criticizing them, they all have their place, but I would like to say that in my agency, we differentiate completely, because I realized right away from the start that when you hand pick the clients, and I do it on LinkedIn, but I hand pick them, I really study them, then we approach them, and then I actually attract, like the law of attraction, I attract the experts which are with whom I can nicely communicate also and dialogue. And sometimes they're on my podcast. And mine is a spirituality podcast. It's called On by the Beach. But there are so many business leaders already interested in mindfulness, and they are very good at it and very enlightened sometimes. And then there are all these enlightened people who are in spirituality, and they like to teach their audience how to come to get a 7-figure business. So it's really coming together in a way. But I have the same experience like you. It is totally transforming for myself and for my audience that this podcasting is just a really fascinating tool that we can talk like this. It's just amazing how this is working. I love it.
And bringing communities together over subjects that they don't necessarily always know something about. That they often say that facts tell, but stories sell. In other words, we're more likely to be inspired by what we hear and see, by an interesting perspective. Particularly when you hear somebody's journey, their life story, something, as entrepreneurs, I love to know that somebody's succeeded, but in a way, I want to know that they've had some bumps along the way as well, and what they've learned from those experiences.
Yes.
I get a lot from that, and so do my audience. But just coming back to podcasts, obviously a lot of the people that are in the creator industry are now having their own podcasts. And I think having great guests makes a difference. And the tighter the niche, sometimes the better, if I'm honest. And that's what I've certainly found. And it's not necessarily always about the size of the audience. It's about the relevance of the audience, particularly if you want to attract a sponsor or an advertising partner. So that said, of course, guests do make a difference. Now, sometimes you don't always find the guests share your the episode, and yet they've appeared on it, but they don't always share that on their own social media feeds. Yes. Why do you think that is, and what can we do as hosts to encourage them to do that?
Yeah, like when I look at my clients, like I have the 4, 5 very prominent and I would say almost famous, because if you're like a musician, you have 200 million downloads, or you're currently on the #1 bestseller list on Wall Street Journal, New York Times bestseller list, and USA Today bestseller list. And I want to skip the time now, which takes to explain more case studies in that way, but they are so busy. They are so busy, and if they don't have really their own team of social media marketing set up, then I wonder sometimes, they do have 30,000 followers on Facebook or Twitter. Sometimes they have like on Spotify like 200,000, and like in the music example. But when I look at their platform, sometimes they have like they post something, or the social media assistant posts something, it hardly gets any traction. It is like liked by a few people, whatever. I think it's ignorance. I mean, they're writing a great book because they're thought leaders, or they're making fantastic music. And then the sharing and all this is just not always necessarily what they do.
Yeah,
it's just, I think, the time factor.
The time factor, yeah. I mean, look, the Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, for example, a very successful podcast. I was staggered to find out he has no less than 30 people working on that one show, from researchers to production. So it just shows you that's a serious business when you do it well and you devote your energies towards it. So yeah. So and going back to what do you think? How long should an average episode be?
Yeah, I like it 45 minutes. It's like a real opportunity for the thought leader, the solopreneur, the person who is becoming an influencer or is already an influencer. I'm not talking that you do this only when you're just on the way. My clients, they're already well established, but they understand the importance of being always visible and never stop. It doesn't matter how much followers you have already. So 45 minutes is good because you are as a guest now, because you have a wonderful opportunity to talk about your branding story. You create your brand, and that brand, that's how people find you. But just a name then, because you have had the opportunity particularly on the podcast avenue, on that kind of marketing channel where you get that time. It's not just an advertising, but you actually can talk. And so that people at the end of the show say, oh, that it was so interesting. I had like the transformative experience. I want to know more about that guest. And how do I connect with them? And that is really the way. But if you do it half an hour, that's also, it can be okay if it's very focused, you know.
Sorry. And I was going to say, how important is it to get the call to actions in there, like at the end, the outros, and in the show notes, putting contact points, because so often you're absolutely right. You've listened to somebody and you think, actually, I want to contact that person. How do I go about doing it? I mean, I normally ask at the end for the guest to, how can people find out more about you?
Yes.
Is my little suggestion.
Exactly.
But yeah.
You see, it's really, you cannot just have an email if you want, because if your expertise is really deep, you have a very compelling story, and you actually helped already people in your podcast interview. It's good enough to have an email. But I've seen very sophisticated marketing funnels and ecosystems of profitability, and I would suggest to every thought leader and every influencer or people on their way to work on this very strongly before they actually commit to a podcast tour, where you can leverage other people's audiences, like 20 or 30 podcasts in a year. And you get to 1 million of people if these podcasts are top level, not average one. It's just a waste of time. I mean, it's all okay. I mean, I have an average one myself, but it's in spirituality. I don't make any money with it. I just do it because I like the whole thing. But in my business, I don't do that.
So what you're saying here is then, so thought leaders could contact people like yourself and say, right, I want to get myself on these top podcasts, and they would employ you to go out and reach and target those top level podcasts with a view of getting them on as guests.
Yes, because I do the positioning. I'm a marketer in that sense, and I do we develop the email pitch, because, you know, the positioning, the bio is not like a resume on LinkedIn. Absolutely. It's not like the biography on the website. It's a very short, because you get a quick attention from the podcast host who receives that. They are used to emails, even though there comes a lot of spam. I do both. I do the email and I do also the LinkedIn contact, but it is a wonderful way to talk. First of all, to tell the podcast host right away that I have listened to several of his interviews and that it was inspiring and entertaining and amazing, and I like it, and I have feedback from it, and I gave you a 5-star rating and all this before you actually pitch somebody. But then you say, since your podcast is about this or that, then you can then introduce the expert. The expert should be introduced. He doesn't want to do it himself. First of all, the people I represent, they want to be represented, of course. I mean, it's like the learning curve. They don't have the time for it. They're making money with their expertise. We are helping them to take all the heavy lifting on us and to get them on interviews and with as little work as possible for them.
And it's a good approach. Well, first of all, you know, you and I are talking because of the pitch that I received myself from your team. So I also think you're right. By somebody using an agency like yourself, it gives more credibility to the guest as well, doesn't it? It makes them a little bit more untouchable. If we are having to educate and sell and advertise and market, it looks a little bit like we need the work, we need the guesting. Whereas actually, if you are representing it, it positions your guest to a slightly more higher level, doesn't it?
Yes, I didn't pitch myself to you either. It was my assistant. So it's like a lot of my all of my clients actually, they choose me and us, and it's a very personalized way. I like to be artistic in this way. I like to really have a nice Zoom meeting with them and find out their marketing strategy, their what they expect from the podcast guesting tour, what their wider audience is. I record it, I study it, put it a little bit in AI, in artificial intelligence, with their bio, and ask a few good prompts. You have to do it nowadays because you have to adapt to the new thing. This is going to be big, but I'm not using it. It's not my language, but I get inspired by this thing. And then I work already on that positioning. And I have to say, that a third person is doing this just simply better. They want to be represented by somebody. It's like a talent agency almost, you know.
Exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think the sheer size of the podcasting market now is when we've got great guests on, and I've had other people reach out to me, and I must admit I've had some amazing guests, and they have come not just through my own network, but actually all through from people like yourself. So it clearly does work and deliver. It also makes our life easier, because if we having to not go and search for those people, they're coming to us, then that's great. You know, particularly if we can share each other's story and content on social media as well.
Yes.
And I'm a great believer in not just relying on one, you know, not just relying on audio. You've also got the video output as well, which you can then put on YouTube or video shorts on TikTok and stuff like that. So that's good.
Then it stays there forever, and you get all these links back to your website. I mean, it does position you for your keywords, which is important when you have a website. Like, you have a fantastic website, but it will feed it all the time with those show notes, with the links to it. It will be always about what you are good at. This is the social media, the influencer marketing, right? Yeah. So that's very important, I think, also. But there are so many other aspects we could talk about. But I'm looking forward to hearing more questions from you. It's just a fascinating thing, you know.
Well, it's the drilling down, isn't it, of those guests, and where what are some of the big guests that you've had, you've got involved with, that you've represented?
Okay, I can tell you a few case studies. Like, I have that the most prominent one is the one who is now everywhere in the States, on the airports with his books, and in all universities, and is read everywhere. His name is Faisal Haq, and he has written 3 books. One is called Lift, the other one is called Everything Connects, and the last one, Reinvent. And all of those 3 books he got on the number 1, 2. Number 1, usually, because they have different categories in the Wall Street Journal, on the number 1 position of the Wall Street Journal, also on New York Times bestseller list and on USA Today bestseller list. When he found me, so I have no idea how, and I missed the first Zoom call, and he was immediately reconnecting, and something attracted him with my website. I have no idea. Then I would say he does a very good job in repurposing the content. So what you want to do also, you know, you want to really, that's what he does on his website. So he just has a few 1-minute clips or 1 episode, and it's a fantastic strategy. We can talk about it maybe later, the content marketing strategy, because you have, like, from 1 episode, you have like at least 10 posts on social media, and nobody on social media really wants to listen to a whole episode. That is wrong. You know, you want to give them a highlight, so you are all the time appearing there, and the people's perception is always that you are the go-to expert, you're the authority, because you're constantly being invited. The people in your circle of influence, they don't know that you have been pitched by an agency. The perception is that, and you know, the perception is that you have been always invited, and you, because you are such an expert and such an authority. So if you can make this, cut it down a little bit and chop it up, and you can use it for years. Like, if you get 10 interviews, you have so much content, you can use it for years on your social media channels.
That's interesting, because I've started to do some shorts, you know, like snippets, but I haven't cut it up as much as you've suggested. And then I tended to perhaps promote an episode, and I'll share it on the BCMA website, I'll share it on my own website, and I'll share it online, and then I'll move on to the next one. But what you're effectively saying is just keep sharing bits of it at appropriate times. And it might be that there is an episode perhaps that I've done last year that could be relevant again today, because there's a topical subject around that subject matter. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and Gordon, the thing what I experience with my clients is that they love one thing. When you get pitched to like high-end podcasts, and so they don't waste their time, because they are like that level, right? Then they also, the other benefit now is not that they have a great audience now and they're leveraging all this audience over the year. The other thing is great, these people like you, they ask poignant questions. So now when the expert now has this framework on this compelling story and all this, but when he gets asked differently, he will talk about it differently. And when you are cutting this out and make it a short clip of a minute or two, you always have new content on your social media. For them, it's always new content on social media because they get to talk always differently about the experts, and people loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, often it's little quotes, isn't it? You know, like a brand. I often say a brand is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. You know, that you could chunk up as a little bit, you know, and that sometimes these little sound bites. I was at Cannes Lions Festival recently, and one of the best sessions was from a global restaurateur. And I could have listened to this guy for hours, and he is absolutely somebody I want on my podcast. I mean, he is also a keynote speaker, but he talks about this amazing level of hospitality that we should use in all of our businesses, not just in the restaurant business. You know, amazing levels of service and attention to detail like I've never heard. But the point is that what made me listen to him is you could hear a pin drop with the way he spoke. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? You know, he's just not a restaurant. He's not any other restaurateur. He's somebody that really, in fact, I won't lie. I was emotional by the end of the speech. It just got to me, and that doesn't happen with everybody. So often it's not just about the story; it's about the impact and the relevance you have for the recipient, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, particularly when you talk about spirituality, you know, and all these transformational coaches, they have such an impact on you. I would say, even so, I studied all my life all these little books about Eastern philosophy and all this, and I've participated in many groups, philosophical groups. But this is my hobby. My business is the other thing, the agency. But I've been transformed so many times by just real one-on-one heartistic from the heart, these conversations, these dialogues. And that is podcasting. I mean, that is podcasting. That is pure podcasting, because there you can, you know, while you would be in a room of 1,000 people and you would raise your hand and maybe you can ask your question. Now you're one-on-one because you have that podcast, and it's fun. For me, it's great. I love it, you know.
Yeah, it is. It can be so powerful in the way that we. I mean, look at we've got fitness podcasts. We've got things that help our well-being. And I remember when I was going on a walk where I lived near some very nice lakes here, and I was wandering around, and I can't remember the name of the guest, but she definitely inspired me, and I made contact with her, and I found that she was another author, and we met at the Business Book of the Year Awards. So it was a really amazing thing when something that she said, in fact, not one thing, a number of things that made me think, yeah, that's right. That's such an easy thing to do with a process that I was working on, but it just happened to click at the right time, at the right moment.
I completely understand, Gordon.
And that's what it is. But you know, when you talk about philosophy, you know, it's and spirituality, it's such a big issue when it comes to entrepreneurs, doesn't it? You know, so many people that are out there, and not just with people that are creating podcasts, but in their daily lives, you know, they'll have ups and downs in their lives. They'll have moments where you think, oh God, I've got to keep going. This is hard work. I'm not getting clients converting, or I've got challenges with my staff or whatever. And it takes inner strength sometimes to keep going. And that's why I think great, inspiring conversations can help a lot. What's your thoughts around that?
Yes, I mean, entrepreneurs, they can be upset because they have sold their business for 20 million and now they don't know anymore what to do. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons.
That's
right?
at the other end.
Yeah. But, you know, when you're like a big manager, like I was a manager, I was a big guy, I was self-important, and suddenly I was in the basement working. After 15 years, I was working in Canada on the basement on my e-commerce stuff. It's a lonely path if you're an entrepreneur. Fortunately, you cannot hang out with others in those forums, in those memberships. You're an expert on memberships also. That's very helpful, masterminds and all this. Yeah, that's the spirituality part is really entering the business field. For instance, there are these business leaders. They talk about like transformational leadership, self-leadership, and they put in mindfulness a lot also. because it's coming from being out there and the leader, and an external personality, manage, lead everything with your persona, to more like what is inside of that leader. Is he a self-leader? Does he know who he is? Like self-knowledge, right? That's already very spiritual. So both, you have to combine it. You are total self. You have both the ego and you have also the inner self. And so that is coming through a lot, because I see it with my clients, and I see it when I research, I see what they are specializing in a lot, right? And so I see it as coming. But I had one little thing to say about what you just said earlier, if I may. There was this, there is this where you make this networking of podcast hosts and guests, and what can happen. Amazing things can happen.
Oh, you mean this is the Marketing Podcast Network that I belong to, or are you just talking generally?
My experience, like a case study, right?
Okay.
In my experience, let's say there is Donna Griffith, and she is a corporate storyteller. She is just at a gift. She can put the business numbers of startups in Silicon Valley into stories. And she has raised billions of dollars doing it. She's my client. And she launched a new book. Why did she launch a new book? She was interviewed by a famous podcast host in Australia. And he helped her understand that she needs a book and how to launch it. So they made good friendships. She was interviewed by the podcast host, and then she made friendship. And then I introduced her to Faisal Hock, who has this incredible Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller. So they talked. And now she launched a book with a podcast strategy as well. But you have to do several things. You have to work with many. Podcast guesting is not always the only thing, right? So ultimately, she launched the book really well, because it's so important that you get this network of people while you do business. So she was on podcast. She knew me. I knew that other experts. They got together, and they took time to help her. And she launched the book very well, because it's so important to launch. When you launch, right, that you start like several months earlier, and then when the time comes that they sell in the first week, and the second week a lot, because then it gets you up in the ranks. So the first weeks are so important. So that happened pure synchronicity, I would say. Synchronicity, there was a lot of that.
Interesting.
And I wanted to mention it because it's like important also to understand.
Well, it's a good point that you raised, because I know that I've appeared on many podcasts myself, and the fact I had a book that had not long been launched was another benefit to my cause. And a lot of the hosts that I was speaking to wanted to not only hear from me, but they were fascinated to hear about why I wrote the book and my background into the whole way I sort of fell into influencer marketing, which was a story in itself. And have you ever found that that you've reached out to people and it hasn't been a great partnership, or one has not reacted so well? In other words, it's not been a good fit.
I don't like to remember it. It was one time. I never lose my temper, nothing. I'm very like into Eastern philosophy, like no friction, right? But I always get really nice emails. I always have good relationships with both podcast hosts and also with the guests, with the clients. Everything takes time, I mean, you can't say tomorrow you make $1 million with it. But if you work on this strategy, you're reaching millions of people. I mean, you reach 100,000 people in 3 months. If you do it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? I was at the podcast show in London only a few weeks ago, which was really interesting. And one of the things I noticed is that there were a lot of people. I was talking about how to monetize your podcast, and it was packed. So there's obviously a lot of hosts out there that are still struggling to find a way to monetize what they do. And one of the tips and advice that I was giving them was making sure that your episodes or your series is quite niche, and you try and find the right type of sponsor or partner that would benefit with a similar aligned audience. And that's really what it's about. In fact, one of my other podcasts, which is called Membership World, I was able to generate some income from the very start with almost 0 followers. And that's because they believed in me. They believed in the vision that I was trying to deliver. And I think that's a really important thing, because podcasting does take time, doesn't it? It takes time to grow an audience, but we shouldn't be so focused on the size of the audience, but more the relevance of it. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with it, of course. It's also the podcasting, it takes years, right? I mean, really, it takes years. You have to be so consistent with the episodes. That's one of my criteria when I choose them. I mean, you have to look at great guests. They have been great. They are focused. They have this global score. There are indicators. But ultimately, when you are an influencer, you want to consider both, because when you do podcast guesting, when you go on a tour, then you leverage other hosts' audiences. And the money aspect comes always to the ecosystem of profitability. In other words, I have clients, they have 100, there's one, she's 100,000 followers. Well, do you need 100,000 followers if you want to do retreats and everybody has to pay $50,000 for a week in Mallorca, and you want to get a group of 20 people, you need all these people. Otherwise, you don't get them together. But, for her, something like a podcast guesting tour is a massive 10x return on investment. Now, when somebody just sells books, they have their own benefits with it. They get awards, they get more sales and all this, but they won't make a lot of money. They might get the money back they pay for the booking agency. It's not that much really. Right. However, then there are those who get clients like coaching. And if the podcast host or the podcast guest, they both have a great website, a great ecosystem of profitability, a great marketing funnel, then both of them can make money, because you can, particularly there's a difference, of course, in executive coaching or spirituality coaching. Executive coaching, when they get the money from the company, you can charge 10 times more. But there are massive amounts of money which are being charged for coaching, like 6 weeks, every week, one time, or sometimes they go for a year, or they go corporate events. They do corporate events. So when that return on investment is there, then it's a no-brainer, and it would never be only the podcasting as a host or the podcast guesting as the client. No, it's like many things come together, as you know, in the marketing. It's just one channel, but it's a good one. For solopreneurs, it's a good one.
No, I totally agree with you. What's your thoughts about doing podcast live?
I have one
like you bring an audience together. I haven't yet done that, but I've been thinking about doing it this year, almost like on stage. So you're recording it and then it's part of a series.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say something else, because that's a different story. Like, I have a friend, he has a radio show, Sustainable Success, and there in this live event each week, it's a little bit tough for the clients sometimes to be exactly at that time, because the podcast can be recorded and then it's published, but a live event is always a little bit more stressful. Now, if you do it live on stage, I think it's I have no idea. I'm sure it's good. It's a good idea. I mean, one has to test it always, right? Yeah. Marketing is actually testing. A different word for it.
Absolutely. So what's the future look like for you? What's in the pipeline?
For me, well, I think I will go with the new trends. In my research, it got better actually with this AI and this. Many people criticize it, artificial intelligence, but it gets better every 3 months. But so much better that now they have like plugins where you probably know Listen Notes, and Listen Notes is the most popular podcast search engine out there, and you get agency subscriptions for it. But the plugin is with the GPT, and it's just amazing what you can research. I mean, when you have just like that person is an expert in, let's say, just to say something, in relationship problems with narcissists, okay, or psychopaths, whatever, and then you get right away all these recent episodes about other people talking about the same subject. And for me, for my agency, it's like interesting, because you can then find out what kind of experts we're talking on it, and on which other podcasts they've been on. So it's a good research tool. So that is the future, actually, that I can be more powerful for my clients. You can also tell them, look, this is my client. Familiarize yourself with it, this ChatGPT. And then you feed in more and more. I was on the Zoom call with him. These are my notes. Familiarize yourself with it. And then it writes basically a lot of things. I never use it the way it is because it's heartless. It's just pure up there, because I like to use spiritual intelligence and really artistic stuff. But I get inspired by it a lot. So I only save time for research. So for me, it's like I'm 64. And for me, the whole thing is already like since the beginning, 5 years ago, a full-time job, but a lifestyle business, because I'm a little bit overstudied in my life, and I wanted to use my spirituality thing and my business thing, because I just wanted to be with experts, and it fulfills me, just like so that will be the future of me also. I mean, I'm living in this beautiful island. I make good friends when I go out, dinners and all this. But then when I work, I meet these extraordinary people. They're my clients. I'm proud of them.
Well, that's great.
I can make them happy, really. That's a good thing.
I mean, you think about how many people just hate what they do. You
Yes.
and I, we come to work and we love what we do because
Yes.
of the variety of the people that we meet, the variety of the work that we do, and the impact that we create. So, Josef, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom about your business and the spirituality as well.
Well, thank you, Gordon, because I was really, I feel like a very much of a privilege that I get to know you. I studied all about you, and I think that you're doing a great work in this world, helping influencers to understand what the business is all about, and to help them, make money with this, because it's hard work to become an influencer.
Oh, it is. Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't profess to know all the answers either. But how can people find out more about you?
Well, the best is to go to my website. It's called guestexpertsonair.com. And there are several videos where I explain things. And then there's my story. And you see a list of podcasts which I have pitched successfully with relationships with them. So when our pitches go out, many of the great podcasts, they already trust us because we have continuously great experts. And it doesn't have to be the best expert. I mean, I've also positioned experts. They are not, so they're just starting out, but it doesn't matter. When you find the positioning, the unique value they bring to the table of discussion, anybody can be super interesting for a podcast interview.
Absolutely. Great. Lovely. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
Thank you also, Gordon. Thank you very much. Have a good day.